Hi everybody, welcome back to the DI basic course. Been some time before since I recorded the last one, so I will now accelerate this program. And interesting question from a previous CAT paper. First time I'm in this course, I'm of course focusing on the 99 to 2008 CAT papers and also good quality questions from there and good quality questions from the IFT and ZAT papers, so that you get a fair idea of what they require to do inside the exam. So that's what my agenda is in these sessions. So interesting question here. The question you should have this question in the material section of the video also, so you can actually take a look at it from there. So I'm just going to read this. So the question says that, or maybe I'll just go into the zoom mode here and expand this for you. The table show trends in transactions of Indian corporate sector during the period 1993 to 94 to 97, 98. In addition, the following definitions hold good. What are the definitions? Sales I, imports I and exports I represent respectively denote sales, imports and exports in the year I. So sales I, imports I and exports I represents the sales, imports and exports in the year I. Next it says deficit in year I. Deficit I is imports I minus exports I. This is a commonsensical formula. Even if you don't know too much of economics, you should be able to understand this. The deficit in year I is imports in year I minus exports in year I. And then they have defined new variable here, which is saying deficit intensity in year I, DII. Please understand this is different from deficit in year I. DII is deficit I upon sales I. Okay, so maybe you should, as I always tell you, when you start solving your data interpretation question, the first focus in a DI question is to get hold of the variables that are involved. Unless you catch hold of the variables, you cannot master a DI set, whether it's traditional DI or logical DI. The first step to mastering a DI question is getting hold of the variables. So we'll go. I would ideally write down all these variables for you right now to understand. But inside the exam, you at least take note that we are now talking about 5 variables. Sales, exports, imports. 3 variables are those. Deficit, which is imports minus exports, and deficit intensity, which is deficit for the year divided by sales for the year. So ये 5 variable define हो गया. And छठा variable जो define कर रहे हैं लोग, the 6th variable they are defining is in this sentence: growth rate of deficit intensity in year I, GDI, is DII minus DII minus 1 upon DII minus 1. You should recognize this formula as basically the percentage structure or the relative growth. So basically, if you want to know the growth rate of deficit intensity, so this 5th variable, इसका growth rate क्या है? DII minus DII minus 1. What does I minus 1 mean? The previous year. So 93, if you want to find the growth rate in 94-95, you subtract the deficit intensity in 94-95 from the deficit intensity of 93-94 and then divided by the deficit intensity of 93-94. Right? So that's what you understand from that. That's a standard growth formula. When you want to find the growth rate between one number to the second, you divide the second, you subtract the second minus first, divide by the first to get you the structure. So that is what this is. So this is the 6th variable. Further note that all imports are classified either as raw material or capital goods. So this is the basic information given to you at this point. And so what you should have an idea of, if you want to get control of this question, is you should know the 6 variables that I talked to you about. What are the 6 variables here? Sales, imports, exports, deficit, which is imports minus exports, deficit intensity, which is deficit upon sales, and this is for any year, This can be calculated for a year I, and deficit also can be calculated for any year. And sales, imports, exports are given for years, for specific years. Of course, again, so these are 5 variables, and the 6th variable is the growth rate. So if I want the growth rate of deficit intensity in year 94-95, my formula should be, this I am doing to understand it for myself. My formula should be deficit intensity of 94-95, which will be calculated from this formula, minus deficit intensity of 93-94 upon deficit intensity of 93-94. So along with understanding the variables involved, one of the keys for doing well at DI, or being strong at DI and getting control of a DI question, is to be able to understand what formulas are running in the question. So ये 6 variables की बात हो रही है यहाँ पे. So the whole game is going to be about these 6 variables. The whole game in this question is going to be about the 6 variables. So let's start moving now. Now it's time to look at the table. And this table shows me trends of external transactions of Indian corporate sector. Okay, I'll take the zoom option again because it makes it easier for you to watch this. So the first information given to me. Acha, one more thing which I should note from my previous bit. This last line is also important. Remember, further note that all imports are classified either as raw material or capital goods imports. So in my understanding of the variables, I have to understand that if I am anytime looking at the imports is split into raw material imports or capital good imports. So for any year, the raw material imports plus capital good imports should be equal to the total imports. That's another variable, that's another relationship that has been given to me. And if I did not spot that at the start, I'm in for trouble, or I'm open for trouble going forward. I mean, I always talk about the fact that when you're doing your DI or LR, you have to improve the quality of the control that you have while solving it. So now let's look at this table. What is this table telling me? So this table is, if you look at my first number here, it's not talking about any of those 6 variables. It's defining export intensity. और नीचे में define किया है उसको यहाँ पे with that star, ratio of exports or imports to sales. So 2 more variables they have given us without telling us. So when I look at that table, I should be able to spot these 2 variables. That not only do I have a deficit intensity formula, I also have an export intensity formula, which is exports upon sales for any year I, and I also have a import intensity formula, which is import upon sales. So 2 more variables are getting introduced here, and the more variables there are, the more obviously there are possibilities for questions being asked. So once I understand this, and then I start reading the table, I wanted to zoom here. Yeah, so when I start reading this table, I see that 93-94, I mean this is export intensity, the first row, and in 93-94 it's 7.3, 94-95, so it's going right to left, it's not going from left to right. So 7.3, 7.5, 7.9, 8.2, 9.2, and then I look at the next row, it is import intensity, and I should be able to work out that because my formulas are if I could look back at my formulas, I should be able to work out when I look at these 2 columns that the deficit intensity, because deficit is exports minus imports minus exports, so I should be able to make out that if I subtract from import intensity, if I subtract export intensity, I should be able to get deficit intensity, because you can look at the formula for any year I, import by sales minus export by sales. So if you do this, you'll get import by sales minus export by sales. Since you are talking about the same year, the sales will be same in that year. So you can take the denominator common, and you've got import minus exports in the numerator, and import minus export is nothing but deficit. So basically what I should realize is that this relationship exists inside this table, that if I subtract import intensity minus export intensity, I am able to get my deficit intensity from here. So I should be able to work out that my deficit intensity here is 5, my deficit intensity here is 8, and so on. And then they are giving me two more rows here. Imported raw material by total cost of raw material, and imported capital goods by gross fixed asset. Now we don't know how these are connecting to where we are at. कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा है यहाँ पे. Imported raw material, एक thought था कि ये raw material का बात किया था कि imports are only raw material और capital goods. So वहाँ से अगर देखोगे, उससे कनेक्ट करोगे तो तुमको दो वेरिएबल और दे दिया गया यहाँ पे in this table. What are those two variables? The two more variables that are given to you is imported raw material by total cost of raw material. That ratio is given to you. And the other thing given to you is imported capital goods upon gross fixed assets. You are given ICG, imported capital goods upon gross fixed assets. And the only thing that makes sense with this part of the data is that I know that imports are either raw material or capital goods. So I should be able to connect that this plus this is my total imports. But how does the denominators connect? कोई idea भी नहीं है. So हमको idea लगाने की ज़रूरत भी नहीं है, because we have taken up all the variables in the question, and we can now start looking at what the questions are here. So if I go ahead and try to look at the first question, the highest growth rate in deficit intensity was recorded in. Now this is a simple question because I know that my deficit intensity is 7.6 here, my deficit intensity is 6.3 here, and my deficit intensity is 5.1 here. Please remember, you are going this way, so 5.1 to 6.3 is more than 20%. In 94-95 the growth rate is more than 20%, and 6.3 to 7.6 is again more than 20%, but you will have to take a call whether 5.1 to 6.3 is a higher growth or 6.3 to 7.6 is a higher growth. 7.6 to 8 is a small percentage growth, and 8 to 5 is obviously an even smaller percentage growth. It's actually a negative growth. So a lot of people, what they did, they made the mistake of looking at 5 to 8 and answering as 96, 97, which was obviously there in the options, right? So please remember that it's from this, you have to look from right to left because 93, 94 is on that side. So the answer is either 94, 95 or 95, 96. So if I go into my options, I have got 94, 95, 95, 96 both. So the judgment here is a calculative judgment now. Should I mark 5.1 to 6.3 as my larger percentage growth, or should I mark 6.3 to 7.6? And these I can look at as 51 to 63 and 62 to 76 because I am just looking at percentage growths. So यहाँ पे जो growth है वो 12 on 51 है, और यहाँ पे जो growth है वो 13 on 63 है. And percentage comparison अगर करोगे, the best way to compare percentage, I have explained this in the ratio chapter. I have to look at these two ratios, which is larger. So if I look at the increase here, the increase here is +1 and the increase here is +12. And the ratio of the increase is much smaller than the original ratio. So this ratio is smaller, this will be larger. For this technique, go back to the ratio proportion chapter. और अगर तुम लोग को दिक्कत हो रहा है तो बता देना, मैं इसके लिए एक स्पेशल वीडियो फिर से बना दूंगा तुम लोग के लिए. Right? How do you compare two ratios? Because ratio comparison is very important. So for somebody like me, this will be a 5-second thought कि 94, 95 is the answer. Because I'll just see it that way. +1 by 12 is much smaller than 12 by 51, and that's my answer there. The value of the highest growth rate in deficit intensity is approximately. So they are asking the value of this highest growth rate. We have to calculate the value of 12 by 51. So they are giving us a second question which is free at this point. ये CAT 99, 2000, 2001 के टाइम का है क्वेश्चन. So उस टाइम वो लोग थोड़े कुछ questions they would give free runs for you, free hits for you कि चलो तुमने इतना देख लिया तो इसको एक और मार्क ले लो. आज के लिए करना बंद कर दिया उन्होंने. पर anyway, इसको कैलकुलेट अगर करेंगे तो 5.1 से 10% is 5.1, so 10.2 is 20%. You got a 1.8 left, and now you are dividing by 0.51 because 0.51 is 1%. So 1.8 divided by 0.51 gives me 3% more. So the only answer which is close to what I need is 23.5. So my answer is fourth one here. तो ये second question हो गया. Third question देखते हैं. Let's look at the third question now. in 1997-98. Now this is where they're using the next two variables, right? So I think I had lost connection in between. So इस case में what we are looking for or what we are trying to understand is what do we do with just trying to check whether my connection is going okay. Yeah, it's all fine. So what they are telling me here is the 97-98, the cost of raw materials, the total cost of raw material estimated as 50% of sales for that year. So let's put that information down. 1997-1998 total cost of raw material is 0.5 of sales for that year. Now we obviously know that total cost of raw material has got something to do with this row. Imported raw material upon total cost of raw material 97-98. We know this ratio is 20.2. तो इस ratio को भी निकाल लेते हैं हम लोग यहाँ पे. Imported raw material by total cost of raw material is 20.2, and all the numbers here are in percentage that's given. So you should realize that this is 20.2%. And if the total cost of raw material is 0.5 sales, this value is 0.5 sales, you realize that IRM divided by 0.5 sales is equal to 20.2. इतना तो कॉमन सेंसिकली लग रहा है कि ये करना चाहिए हमको, because the trigger starts in the question starts from the total cost of raw material. That's where the trigger in the question starts. So this much we do, and we try to see what else is given. Let the question lead us, because इससे आगे कुछ दिख नहीं रहा है यहाँ पे. And then they say the turnover of gross fixed assets defined as the ratio of sales to gross fixed asset in 97-98 is approximately. So they have certainly asked us a question. They have asked us a question of turnover of gross fixed assets defined as ratio of sales to gross fixed assets. So they are asking me sales upon gross fixed assets of 97-98. They are asking me this ratio, and they are giving me options here of 33, 4.3, 0.33 and not possible to determine. तो सबसे पहले तो वही लगता है कि नॉट पॉसिबल टू डिटरमाइन होगा, इवन मेरे को भी वही लग रहा है, बट लेट्स सी. नाउ वो ग्रॉस फिक्स्ड एसेट पे ले जा रहे हैं, तो ग्रॉस फिक्स्ड एसेट का ओनली वेरिएबल इज दिस, सो आई शुड ब्रिंग दिस आउट फ्रॉम हियर. एंड द इंपोर्टेड कैपिटल गुड्स अपॉन ग्रॉस फिक्स्ड एसेट फॉर दैट ईयर 17.6. सो दिस रेशियो इंपोर्टेड कैपिटल गुड्स अपॉन ग्रॉस फिक्स्ड एसेट is 17.6, right? ये रेशियो दिया हुआ है. And the other two informations given to me about 97-98 is that export intensity is 9.2 and import intensity is 14.2. So export upon sales is 9.2% and import upon sales is 14.2%. So the question now is, can I use these four informations to get that? That's the question. I want sales in the numerator and I want gross fixed asset in the denominator. So to do that, what I should do basically, in some way or the other, I have to divide this by this, because if I divide that by that, what I'll get is ICG upon gross fixed asset into, if I put this on the denominator, IRM by 0.5 SS, the 0.5 S will go up and IRM will come down. So what I'll see here is 0.5 S upon IRM. So when I do this, I realize that if I want to find the ratio of S upon GFA, the hurdle is in finding the ratio of ICG upon IRM. So can we do this? Even I am trying to think about this. Can we do this here? Can we somehow get this information here? So one thought here that you need to understand is that the imports are either capital goods imports or raw material imports. So if I break this into ICG plus IRM upon S, this value is 14.2 and IRM by 0.5 S is 20.2. So IRM by S will be 10.1, 20.2 into 0.5. So if IRM by S is 10.1, ICG by S will be 4.1. Right? You have, maybe I'll write this here. What we used was ICG. We had this ratio I by S is equal to 14.2, and I is equal to ICG plus IRM. And see why it's so important. I keep telling you all the time why it is so important to catch hold of the ratios or of the variables. And this is one of the toughest questions in the CAT ever. This will compare to anything that you will see now in DI. And very difficult to execute this in the exam, but it's a good learning experience so that at least if you have seen this difficulty, anything less than this comes, you are at least prepared for that level. So I is defined as ICG plus IRM upon S, and this is equal to 14.2. And if I split this into ICG upon S plus IRM upon S, तो यहाँ पे मेरे को दिखता है कि पिछले इसमें मुझे IRM upon 0.5 S दिया हुआ था. They have given me IRM about 0.5 S, so IRM upon 0.5 S is 20.2, so IRM upon S will become 10.1. So once I get that, IRM upon S is 10.1, once I get this information that this value is 10.1, I can get this information that this value is 4.1. And that means in this scenario, I wanted the ratio of sales upon GFA. And for that I had traced that I want the ratio of ICG upon IRM. So if IRM upon S is 10.1 and ICG upon S is 4.1, I want the ratio of ICG upon IRM. I can just divide 4.1 by 10.1 because 4.1 is ICG upon S and 10.1 is IRM upon S. So the S will get cancelled and you will get ICG upon IRM. So this is around 4.1, so it's around 0.4 or 40%. So they are asking me what is the ratio of, okay, one second, before we get there, एक चीज़ और करना पड़ेगा हमको. ये ICG upon IRM 4.1 upon 10.1 आया, and there's also 0.5 here, right? So when I'm writing 4.1 upon 10.1, I multiply this by 0.5, so I get a 2.05 upon 10.1 here into S upon GFA, right? But where did we get this ratio from? We got this ratio from ICG upon IRM, ICG upon GFA. This ratio was 17.6 into IRM upon 0.5 S upon IRM. So divided by 0.5 S upon IRM divided by 20.2. So this will be divided by 20.2. This is equal to this value. So इसको solve करोगे तो I think you should get an answer. I'll repeat this last part. ये last part थोड़ा unclear हो गया तो इसलिए last part में फिर से repeat कर दे रहा हूँ. ये analysis तो clear हो गया ना ICG और IRM का कि ICG का वैल्यू कितना है, ICG अपॉन S का वैल्यू कितना है, IRM का अपॉन S का वैल्यू कितना है. दैट्स बेस्ड ऑन अ सिंपल स्प्लिटिंग ऑफ I into two parts. It's based on a simple split. So that was easy to get, and you got this information from IRM upon S का information तुमको यहाँ से मिला था. They had told us total cost of raw material is 0.5 S. So इस 0.5 को इधर ले जाओगे तो IRM upon S का वैल्यू वहाँ से मिल जाएगा. तो वो पार्ट तो क्लियर होना चाहिए. Let me just explain the other part to you. हमको क्या था कि the question had targeted, this is not something that came from my mind, the question had targeted कि S upon GFA निकालना है. तो जब मेरे पास ये इन्फॉर्मेशन है और वो इन्फॉर्मेशन है ये दोनों इन्फॉर्मेशन मेरे को पॉइंट किया था. क्वेश्चन हैड पॉइंटेड मी टू दिस इन्फॉर्मेशन and this information. I realize that I can divide this ratio by this ratio, right? Let me put this on a new slide, or let us put this on this. ICG upon GFA, if I divide this by IRM by 0.5s. Now, why am I doing this? Because I realized that if I use this, the 0.5s will go on the top and GFA into IRM will become the denominator. I get a ratio, and this ratio we know the ratio is 17.6 upon 20.2. This is 17.6 upon 20.2. तो इसको अगर उल्टोगे तो ये तुम्हारा ICG into 0.5s divided by GFA divided by IRM into GFA. अब इस रेशियो में से तुमको सिर्फ you just have to synthesize this much S upon GFA, right? And that's because the question gave you that trigger कि S upon GFA निकालो. That's why we did this division. It is not a random thought that came from my side. The question triggered this thought. So S upon GFA मेरे को चाहिए, तो इसको divide करूँगा तो obviously मेरे को ये मिलेगा. तो ये this is equal to 17.6 upon 20.2. Now my hurdle here is ICG upon IRM, और ICG upon IRM का working out ये है, और इस context में ICG upon IRM में अगर करूँगा तो ये 4.1 by 10.1 आ जाएगा. So I can replace this by 4.1 because this is ICG upon sale and IRM upon sales. If I divide this by this, sales will get cancelled. It will become 4.1 upon 10.1, and then this 10.1 is very, very nice because this cancels this twice. This cancels this twice, and you have S by GFA as 17.6 divided by 4.1 into 0.5 into 2, and 0.5 into 2 is 1, so you can ignore this. So you get a very nice ratio of 17.6 upon 4.1, which is ending up as 4.3. So for those times, this was amazingly tough, this question. People, I mean, nobody really understood this question. Even trainers did not understand this question, but I have been teaching this from that time. And in the context of today's CAD, you need to understand that this kind of thing can happen. And of course, not many people get this. It's very difficult to get this entire thinking. But if you go trigger-wise, you can actually get it. This, I mean, if you see, there was a lot of self-generated thought in this question. But those thoughts came after the question triggered off something, right? When the question was leading me to the first information, I had no clue about क्या बोल रहा है, कहाँ जा रहा है. So only when I applied my mind to the variables involved and to the target that I want S by GFA, that's where the thinking started. So you have to learn when you're developing your DI and your LR and your quants, you definitely have to improve the quality of thinking inside question-driven logic. There are two kinds of logics that you execute in questions. One part is where the question directly drives you to the logic, and the second part is where it's not just question-driven logic. It's apart from after the question-driven logic is over, you have to create some self-generated thought. Obviously, questions which require more self-generated thought require more work to do when you're solving them. So anyway, let's come back to the last question. Which of the following statements can be inferred to be true from the given data? During the 5-year period between 94 to 97, 98, exports have increased every year. You can't make out because you know export intensity. Export के बारे में कहाँ पता है तुमको? You don't know anything about exports. You know export intensity. Export intensity has grown every year, but does not mean exports has grown because every year sales will change. So this is a ratio. So you can't make out anything about the variable. स्पेसिफिक वेरिएबल एक्सपोर्ट्स के बारे में कुछ नहीं निकाल सकते बिकॉज तुमको इन्फॉर्मेशन दिया हुआ है एक्सपोर्ट अपॉन सेल्स का फॉर एवरी ईयर, सो यू कैन टेक दिस आउट. सेकंड क्वेश्चन, ड्यूरिंग द 5-year पीरियड बिटवीन 93, 94 to 97, 98, imports have decreased every year. The moment you look at this, that they are asking about the absolute variable imports, you know that you are given import intensity just like that, so you can't answer this question. or you can't make out about this, you can't infer this. So option 1 and 2 are gone. Deficit in 97-98 was lower than 93-94. Do you know deficit? Do you know deficit intensity? So you can't answer this question also. Deficit is an absolute value. You can't answer this question. So it has to be 4. Deficit intensity is increased every year between 93-94 to 96-97. This is obviously correct. It has to be. And you can see this, that deficit intensity 5.1, 6.3. We already seen this, 7.6 and 8. So deficit intensity has increased every year between 93-94 to 96-97, and that's the correct answer in this question. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this this lesson. Very, very nice question, specifically the third one. The others were okay, but the third one was very, very instructive in terms of understanding what DI can throw at you at times. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next class, in the next lesson. Do these sets first by trying it yourself before you watch my video on it. Don't just be a passive watcher. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Bye for now.